The first descent pod broke atmosphere at 3:12 and made no sound at all. That was the tell. Sael caught it from the signal board in the Valley watch station. Not a noise but a gap, a sudden clean absence in the sub-audio register, the kind of hole that only opened when something very large was working very hard to be quiet. She was 15 years old and she had been trained since age 7 to recognize exactly that shape of silence. She did not wake her father. She pressed her palm flat against the acoustic dampener panel on the console, felt its gentle hum die under her hand, and keyed the Valley alert on its lowest possible setting. 3 pulses of light at the base of every family's door frame, no sound, no chime. Then she pulled her boots on and moved. Outside, Dhen Valley was doing what it always did in the small hours. Enormous, still. The mountain walls on either side rose 1.5 kilometers above the valley floor, and between them the settlement of 400 people slept inside buildings designed for one purpose above all others. The rooftops were sound-insulated polymer over compressed stone. The walkways were rubber-padded granite. The livestock pens were wrapped in acoustic baffling. Every door hinge was oiled on a 7-day cycle. No one in Dhen Valley raised their voice if they could help it. No one dropped a tool without flinching. Children learned before they learned to read that noise was the one currency you never spent unless you had to. That lesson was not paranoia. It was preparation, handed from grandparent to child across 6 generations, and tonight it was going to matter. Sael moved down the main walkway at a careful jog, rubber-soled boots soundless on the pad. She passed the Morn household and saw the door light pulsing. She passed the community store and saw the light at its threshold. She passed old Deccan's repair shed and watched through the window as he rose from his cot, already reaching for the signal lantern with the amber lens. No words, no questions, because no one in Dhen Valley needed to be told twice. The Valley alert system had been silent for 11 years. The last time it activated, Sael had been 4 years old. She did not remember that night except as a feeling, a held breath so wide it seemed to come from the ground itself. She reached the relay shed at the valley's north end and pressed inside. The ceiling was low, the walls thick, and the room smelled of machine oil and old electronics. 3 screens. 2 of them she understood. The third, the long-range acoustic resonance array, fed by 47 subsurface sensor nodes installed across the valley floor and the lower mountain slopes, she understood better than anyone. She had spent 2 years calibrating it with Dhen, who was the valley's senior technician and her mother's brother, and who had died 8 months ago of a heart condition that had nothing to do with aliens at all. The screen showed her what she had suspected from the watch station. 11 descent signatures coming down in a dispersal pattern across a 4-kilometer front. Not one ship landing. A spread. A net. They were hunters, and they were trying to cover every exit from the valley floor before they touched down. Sael heard a soft sound behind her. Her mother, Yella, had come in without her knowing. Yella was 38, short, with the kind of stillness that came from a lifetime of understanding how sound moved in enclosed spaces. She looked at the screen and touched Sael's shoulder once, gently. Then she pointed at the secondary panel on the left-hand wall. The activation panel for Protocol Vethyr. 6 generations ago, when the first accounts reached Dhen Valley of what the Kethori were, a hunting caste species that had seeded Earth with acoustic sensor organisms centuries before, and now returned, periodically, to harvest whatever had grown bold enough to make noise. The valley's founders had decided not to simply survive the Kethori. They had decided to end them. Not through weapons, through patience. Protocol Vethyr had been built over 90 years, updated each generation, tested against sensor data from 3 prior Kethori landing events at other valleys and 1 at the coast. It was not a defense system in the conventional sense. It was a reversal. The Kethori hunted by sound. Their tracking organisms, small, crab-like creatures that moved through soil and stone, transmitted acoustic signatures to the hunting units above, who then descended on the noise source. The founders of Dhen Valley had asked a different question. What happened when the prey learned to generate exactly the kind of acoustic signature the hunters needed, from exactly the direction the hunters were not coming from? Sael keyed the activation sequence. Her hands were steady. She had practiced this 400 times and never expected to use it. Deep beneath the valley floor, in 6 sealed chambers installed by her great-great-grandfather's generation, electromagnetic drivers woke and began to vibrate at precise, controlled frequencies. The vibrations moved through rock, not air. They did not make noise in any human sense, but to the Kethori sensor organisms embedded in the valley's bedrock, they translated as the acoustic signature of a large, unaware, unsuspecting settlement. Everything loud, everything exposed, everything on the western slope. The western slope was empty. It had been empty for 60 years. The buildings up there were facades, rooftops with no walls behind them, walkways that led nowhere, livestock pens with no livestock. The valley's actual population lived on the eastern side, pressed against the mountains, inside structures designed to emit almost no acoustic signature at all. The Kethori did not know this. The Kethori had censored data from organisms calibrated for human noise patterns from 300 years ago, before the protocol existed, before anyone in Dhen Valley had decided that preparation beat panic every single time. The descent pods came down on the western slope. Sael watched the thermal signatures on the third screen fed to her station by an orbital platform the valley had been tied into for 40 years. 11 pods, 11 landing plumes, nearly simultaneous, touching down on the phantom settlement that looked, to the Kethori, like a full human population at rest. She counted the seconds. Her mother's hand rested on her back. The Kethori were thorough hunters, that was known. They would spend 20 to 30 minutes on initial assessment before beginning any active sweep. That was the pattern from prior events. Sael had 20 to 30 minutes to complete the second part of the protocol. She picked up the signal pad and walked outside. The valley was completely silent. The 400 people of Dhen Valley were awake behind sealed walls and soundproofed windows, watching their doorlight signals, waiting. No child cried. No dog barked. There were no dogs in Dhen Valley. Dogs barked. Every family had been told, if your door light pulses 3 times in the night, you are already inside the plan. You do not open a door, you do not make a sound, you wait for the green light. Sael moved toward the lower eastern slope, toward the subsurface access hatch set into the mountainside. It was covered by 3 meters of stone and a rubber-sealed pressure door. She moved in complete silence, and she thought of her uncle Dhen, who had spent the last 2 years of his life recalibrating the acoustic array nodes, lying on his back under the valley floor with his tools wrapped in insulating cloth so they would not click. He had known what he was doing. He had told her, the Kethori will come back. They always come back. The only question is whether the valley is ready when they do. She reached the hatch, unsealed it with her palm, and dropped into the access corridor below. The subsurface passage ran the full eastern length of the valley floor, 600 meters, and it was where the valley's secondary tool waited. At the far end, under a panel that required 2 handprints to open, hers and her mother's, was the directional transmitter, not a weapon, a sender, installed by her grandmother's generation and upgraded 4 times since. It broadcast on the same subaudio frequency the Kethori used to communicate with their ship. It did not say anything complex. It said, in the Kethori's own acoustic language, a language Dhen Valley had spent 3 generations learning by parsing recordings from the coastal landing events, one specific phrase. The phrase translated loosely as, "This valley has been claimed by a Kethori high authority prior order and is off-limits to harvest operations." The priority code had been reverse-engineered from a salvaged Kethori pod fragment recovered at the coast 40 years ago. The Valley Council was not certain the code was still valid. They were moderately certain. Sael was moderately certain. She was also carrying a secondary option, a directional acoustic emitter that would generate, from 11 specific angles simultaneously, a noise pattern so close to the sound of a Kethori settlement in full population distress that the hunting unit's own instincts would override their mission protocol and trigger an emergency recall. The second option was cruder and less certain, but it would work as a fallback. She reached the transmitter panel, pressed both palms, and watched it open. Then she stopped. She made herself breathe. She thought of her father in their house on the eastern slope, lying awake in the dark behind 3-centimeter soundproofed walls, trusting her. She thought of the 73 children in the valley who were doing the same thing she had done at age 4, lying still, breathing slow, waiting for someone to make it right. She pressed the transmit key. For 47 seconds, nothing happened. Then the thermal feed on her signal pad shifted, and the 11 red signatures on the western slope began to change. They were not spreading into the valley. They were contracting. The pods were recalling their units, slowly, methodically, with the order that hunting castes used when a priority override commanded compliance. No scramble, no panic, just obedience. In 8 minutes, all 11 pods had relaunched. In 11, they were above the cloud ceiling. In 19, they were out of atmosphere. The orbital platform confirmed their trajectory, a straight line toward their carrier ship, which had been holding in high orbit with what Sael now estimated, from its thermal mass, was a fleet of roughly 40 vessels. A substantial harvesting operation, one that had just been told by its own authentication system that this valley was reserved and that it should redirect. There was no alternative site. The Kethori's sub-audio survey data, acquired before they descended, would have shown them that Dhen Valley was the only settlement of significant acoustic signature within range. Every other valley within 100 kilometers had been deliberately silenced over the past generation. Small relay stations, sound-dampening infrastructure, coordinated planning across 9 separate settlements. The whole region had spent 60 years becoming the wrong place to hunt. The fleet would report back. They would file a query on the priority code. By the time that query was answered, by the time anyone in the Kethori authority structure confirmed the code was 300 years old and no longer valid, Dhen Valley would have passed the report to Earth's Deepwatch orbital network, which would route it to the Planetary Defense Council, which had standing authority to engage any Kethori vessel that returned to investigate. They would not be coming back to Dhen Valley. Sael sat on the floor of the access corridor for a long moment, her back against the stone, and let herself breathe. Somewhere above her, 400 people were still pressed against their walls in the dark, waiting for the green light. She picked up the signal pad and keyed it. One long green pulse at every door frame in the valley. Then she sat a moment longer. She thought about sound, about how it moved, how it carried, how it gave you away or how it hid you, and how the difference between those two things was not luck but the slow, patient accumulation of what people left for each other. 6 generations of families had lived careful, quiet, deliberate lives in this valley, and passed the knowledge forward like a stone handed in the dark, and none of them had done it from fear alone. They had done it because they understood something the Kethori did not, that silence was not absence. Silence was a choice. Silence was a weapon, and it had been waiting a long time to be used. Her mother's footsteps came down the access corridor, light, careful, rubber-soled. Yella came around the bend with the amber lantern and crouched beside her and said nothing at all. She just put her arm around Sael's shoulders and held her. After a while, Sael stood. She climbed back up through the hatch into the valley night. It was quiet, and the stars were out, and somewhere high above them, 11 pods were docking with 40 ships that were already turning for the outer system. She stood on the valley floor and looked up at the sky and did not say anything. There was nothing to say. The valley had been ready, and now it was over, and the work of the next generation had already started. She had a report to write, calibration data to log, sensor node readings to archive, Protocol Vethyr's activation record to file with the regional network. She had notes on the transmitter's performance that her uncle would have wanted to have, and that someone after her would need. She would write all of it down carefully, and she would pass it forward, because that was what you did with knowledge that mattered. She walked back to the relay shed in the silence of the valley, and sat down at the screens and began.